Ah, Stephen J., Linda J., thank you again for those recurring dedicated donations. Really, really appreciate that every single time. Stephen, I hope you're doing okay these days. And one of these days, maybe we should talk about what a cop learns about painting, what the analogies are in that world. That doesn't seem very probable to me, but I'd love to hear if there's something. A connection between what we do and and that world. It's very interesting. I once in a while read detective books, not very often. It's always interesting. The whole thing we're in is a kind of a problem-solving thing for the longest time. And even when you're doing a painting itself, there's an element of the problem-solving and just the ideas of coming to terms with what the composition is. You're investigating, you're searching it out. So I guess I'm seeing the comparisons already on my own. Chris C. Had a critique from me yesterday, and but he sent me an email with a picture of what he was working on, and he said, "Can we talk about proceeding in the visual order from here, from this point in the drawing, of course, or is it better that I stumble along further?" I really like this question about stumbling along. There's something, I want to repeat something that Gamble said once. He said, "I don't teach, I inculcate," and he said, "Do you know what that means?" And he said, "That means I'm going to repeat this so often that you won't be able to forget it." So it may be on what we're doing today with Chris is that, but in the course of the stumbling along further, there is this thing that you have to do. You have to search it out. But let's see if we can inculcate by repeating stuff we've said before, but putting it in a whole maybe slightly new framework. New framework because it's his picture. This is the image he sent to me online. One of the things that happens, and this is a side by side. One of the things that I try to get students to do is when they're doing drawings to have them more or less horizontally aligned. You can see it's easier to see when it is. Well, what I did is I changed it. I just cut this picture in half, then organized them side by side. So did I do that twice? All right. So this is the image, and these are the points I covered with Chris yesterday, and I may cover other points as well, but. You should be able to see. I think I've never liked the idea of my eye going up and down like this, trying to get from the image to the painting. From whatever it is I'm painting, I'd way prefer to look from side to side in every situation. It's just easier. I find it easier on the eyes, and it's easier to make that one comparison the Meldrum wants you to make, which is a very valid one, and that is you can see whether or not they just would flow into each other if they feel like they're of a piece with each other, if your drawing, rather, is of a piece with the painting so far. So let's see if I can just refresh the brain. What I'm doing here, this whole idea is to talk again about visual order. And there are many kinds of orders to painting, right? So there's one of the orders is draw outlines, then draw the shadow line, mash the shadows, and noodle, right? That's a thing. And it's, by the way, it's a thing that one does, in any case, to one degree or another. But in our world, it operates differently. And those things are useful pieces of information. But what we're really trying to do when we're talking about the visual order is to get you to start operating the painting in a kind of an order. You'd say, so what's first, what's second, what's third? And we tend to say a couple different things. First of all, we say, let's establish the parameters of the painting. So we choose, as Chris did here, you choose the top and the bottom, and you just articulate enough of that so that it feels like this, and you say, I'm not going to move those. Now, you're not going to move them this way, but you could actually have to change an angle of one of them to the other one, if you don't get that absolutely right at the beginning. Don't be surprised, and try to get that right too. Get the angle relationship or anything else that's a back straggler of those two things. But that's just the physical orientation of where your drawing is going to be on the page. It has nothing to do with the visual order. But that brings up the subject of classes of critique. So he said, I want you to talk about the visual order. He could have said, I want you to come in and look at my proportions. I want you to come in and look at the gesture and the angles as I've been, how am I doing on that? But rather he said, can we talk about proceeding in the visual order from here? And so here we are. We're gonna talk about proceeding in the visual order. So it's going to be a visual order conversation. You know, when you're doing a critique with a student, the back straggler, that is to say, it's going to fall into one of these classes, and that should wind up being your focus for that critique. It should be about the back straggler, but it should be talking about that class of things. On the other hand, when you're just trying to figure out what the nature of a visual order, you're going to just do whatever you can to work that out in whatever subject is sitting in front of you. The key to working it out, though, and this is where I begin with Chris yesterday. Hi, Chris. was to ask him, could he close one eye and darken down the other one, and tell me what he's not going to draw? And I often say that, you blur down to find out what not to draw. So it's an organizational principle. We're going to draw this and not that. Well, what is this? Well, it's an area of the painting, right? Because we really do work from areas. Well, he's already sort of started that discussion because he's drawing the left side outline. You see what I mean? Right around here. And he's made it first, and he's made it stronger than virtually everything else, which is the way it presents in nature. So he's already working, as you would say, in the visual order to some degree. On the other hand, he has passages along here that are reading too strongly, right? So he's got this all simplistic, and you can see there are places like here that just completely disappear, and there are places like this back. This is actually a little more lit than what we looked at yesterday, but if you blur your eye, you'll see categories. So we're going to talk about the visual order as a class. And now let's talk about some other ones, though. So when you're trying to proceed in the visual order, you blur down your eyes. And I asked my next question to him. Well, the first one was, what are you not going to draw? And he found that puzzling, right? In a sense, you could say what you're really finding out is what to draw too, right? But what you're not going to draw is what disappears. So if you all look at this thing and the image in front of you and blur down your eyes, you'll see where I don't really want you to focus your drawing. So early and often, you're going to focus your drawing on strong things, right? On high contrast things, the things that come to your eye. And again, consult Max Melder on that subject. It's very useful. He's very good about that. I forget what his word for it is, but it's that disturbance or something like that, the brightness. So if you blur your eyes and look at this, in nature, the most powerful thing is here. Probably the next most powerful thing happens in through here. And then thirdly, this, and finally, this piece down here. But I'm talking about now 4 major areas. So my next question to him is, if you blur down, what are the 4 things you can still see that what were those things? And so we're talking now about the value, 4 spots of value. And that's when I try to say to people what we're really doing. Instead of drawing objects, we're drawing value units. And if you blur down, you'll start seeing those units. You'll see that this one here, and this one here all separate into value units. This one could, at some point, looks like it's part of this, but you're going to find out in this scheme here that there are the lights, there are these midtones here that travel right through this whole thing, coming out through here. And there are the darks, minimally this dark, which you could say maybe is the same as the shadow, or 2 darks, meaning the shadow value, which is here and here and here, and this one. But you can think of it that way. It really helps you because it helps you to know what you're not going to be drawing. If you keep remembering that what I'm trying to get you to draw in this way of working is the subplot. Don't draw subplot. So major masses are the plot, right? Power, the top level of the power order, that's the visual order. The top visually are the things to draw. And the one thing I'm trying to get you to do is to draw them very articulately. In my last point down on this thing, you can see I'm saying precise versus general articulation. So one of the things I am trying, you'll see when you look at this, you'll see what the back stragglers are of the big impression, right? Now keep saying that. If you don't look at even if you look at this in general ways, you'll see what's missing from this thing. You can see busyness, spots missing in here. That's one thing you see for sure. But there's a major mass in through here. This whole middle tone and down through here ought to be a different value. So the ghostness of that is a very big back straggler, isn't it? The absence of that mass. However, what are we going to do? Are we going to go in there and articulate every little bump all through this area? Or are we going to try to organize it? So he's already started the organization of this area, but this will be the next part. And he wants to articulate this really well and organize it. See, it plumbs with something. It lines up with something this way. It's got a lot of good orienting aspects to that unit, but draw that as well as you can, including its So what do you guys call it? It's fattiness. It's with its midtones on there, so it looks like itself. And move that around, make it really get it really in the right place. It's got to be in the right place linearly. So if you do a stack, is it a third from here to here to here? Does it land in the right place that way? And et cetera, et cetera. It's also participating, of course, in anything that has to do with the width and how that width feels to the height. You're always going to be working on those kinds of things, but you're working with these kinds of things, okay? So the things I'm trying to get you to articulate, and he really got himself nicely started down here. That's a really crucial thing down through here. And so this corner here really is a power corner, isn't it? That really jerks to your eye. This whole thing does right here, right? This to a lesser degree. And he knocked this down a little bit, but that's a classic place where you don't want to be drawing it because it's an object. You want to wait on it. And again, I'm suggesting to you guys in visual order, you could avoid drawing the right side of this and just go immediately up to something that reads well. You can do that. I'm not saying you must, but if you do draw this edge over here, just make sure the value contrast is right in relation to this. That is very weak. And again, remember, visual order has to do with power contrast first, and there's this whole order of them. So we talk about, if you're talking about a bas-relief, there's a bunch of the heads that sit way out here, and then next back is a bunch of the shoulders and other parts of the body that sit back here, and then back here is the landscape or the couch or whatever your sitters are sitting on. There are levels of projection. Well, these are visual projections here we're talking about, and they're created by contrast, right? Mostly. And Ang makes it a point of saying that some of them are created by form. So this brilliant light here, the midtones all through here, the midtones through here are pushing that up into one of these power areas. This is a very strong area in the original. So what I'm trying to do is get him, he's done this, he said the right things here, he's trying to analyze these points, get them lined up pretty well with each other. Anything that makes a point, that you see he's done it out here and here and here. Now that's something you're going to be, it's always going to be in your charge to make that better. So it's not my job to do this critique today, but this big angle looks like it should be a little less obtuse, right? This big one here looks like it should be, obtuse means like this of an angle. And if you go like this, it's more acute, right? And then halfway in between is a 90-degree angle, etc. So what I'm trying to get one to do is, first of all, to blur like crazy to see what not to draw. Then I'm trying to get you to articulate really well those points that set up the areas that you're not going to draw, shall we say. So what happens is, this is the edge of a mass here that we're going to turn into a general statement. So we're going to generalize the value movement through here without getting into it, except at this point we're going to articulate it really good. If it has a little dark to light stuff, we're going to do it, but we're not going to go in there and draw all these things, because remember, in our way of working, the majors have to not just be on there first, but they have to be good first. They have to be leading, right? People don't necessarily always hear that in my conversation. So we're trying to draw that. And this, by the way, as soon as you do this, this is going to have its relationship to all these other guys out here that are already out there, and you've done to the best of your ability. This thing in itself might give you a heads up on where that really should have been, or where something else really should have been, once you get that in there and operating. And that's the way every new thing you bring in, you know, even in the class of strong things, but even when you go to the weaker things, each of them should be seeing what they can do to help you correct the first stuff. That's what drawing with your eyes is enabled by. Do you follow that? So as soon as you put in a smudge in here and put that and get that up there, you start looking at it and say, oh, how does that correct this? How does that affect this? Oh, look at that line across there and how that feels to vertical. What does that tell me? Or when I finally get this lined up so it's in the right position in relation to whatever else I have down here. By the way, don't fail to see if they're happening, that when you have a line going diagonally across the picture, that you could, if that's actually an easy thirds or something, you want to notice that. But I'm only saying that there are lines through pictures that pick up numbers of points on a line, and lines are like, you know, it's like this. It's easy to see the thirds lines, you know, top and bottom, and these two marks in here. It's relatively easy to find those two on a line, right? You can say, is it thirds? Is it quarters? And if it's not, it's still memorable. It's still going to be memorable. But I'm just saying, no matter where you go, if you go from line here to here, you'll notice where this lands has to be right on a line. So is that half? Whatever it is in relation to half, you want to have right in there. Okay, so these things never go away. All these things are just truthful points. But we're still working on the visual order. So I'm going to be working on making this disappear as part of the generalization process one, and this one appear better. I'm going to be working I'm going to be actually working on making this very articulate, because that's the end of this unit right here, right? There's something about this little area, and they're going to have to draw with a cupping action. So it's going to have to go from whatever value it is and creeping up and suggesting the scoop of that form, the inside of a bowl of that form right there. So, and then that thing has to be noticeably in the right place when you're looking at all the other things too. So it's all possible, but this is the edge of a big mass that sits here. And you'll do the same thing with all this other stuff. So when you get to here, there's going to be stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So what else can I say? Now, but again, blurring your eyes, you're going to see that this is really for some very long time not the thing to be working on. Now, if you go blocking through there and make it all one value, it's going to look absolutely ridiculous. So you don't have to do that. You can use a little bit of the kind of marking he's making here, but don't lose time in there. As I started saying, the time is of the essence. Just keep your focus on the power guys and the big guys, the majors, what Hale calls the majors. So the majors are the big proportions, like whatever this is to here to there. That's more in the class of a major across this thing here than this to this to this to this. You follow that? So your focus is going to be on really getting the majors to do whatever they do, and to be right in whatever way they need to be right. That's a pretty good spot right there. That's a good point spot for using for getting measurements from both ways, left and right and up and down. Okay, so I've given you that there's a major light, that's the four points that you're going to set up. If you go to each of those, when you're working on those points, if you go to the places that are dominant, that really stick out, maybe it'll be the tip of a nose here. Who knows what it'll be? Definitely it'll be some of the outside over here. If you can go to those places and don't feel like you have to draw everything else, but find some way of generally being true, I want you to do that, okay? But you're drawing this mass, this mass, this mass, and this mass, so to speak. Now, you don't have to draw all the way around all of them, but your goal is to try to set up this here as a unified something else against this as a light, okay? That sort of thing is the way your blurred eye is telling you to think. All right. So, but everything else about visual order is just making sure where two values meet, that your edges are as sharp as they should be compared with other edges, and that the contrasts are all they need to be. And so that when you look at say this sharpness in relation to that wall, that thing back there, it'll look like the right distance from the wall. Or if you're looking at whatever the chin is doing versus this or to this, but it will create a special sensation for you if it's actually true in those relationships that I just described. Now let's see if there's anything else. Well, so if you're looking at this big white, let's talk about the back straggler. If you're looking at this big mass here, you see that it looks like a ghost, right? This doesn't look like a ghost. In fact, it looks fairly busy in areas like this, somewhat in here, but very busy in areas like this. So these areas, so those areas can't sit there indefinitely looking ghostly. Those are the back straggler. How do I know that when I look at the whole, the absence of this value makes it a back straggler, right? Of course, that's just simply in terms of you're missing a value, a big one. The busyness of this, the lack of stuff happening through here makes that a back straggler. And by the way, in areas of the greatest interest in the setup are areas that are going to, after you get the thing moving in big ways, these areas here are going to be the thing you're going to work on. That area you have permission to work on next because of its significance. In other words, should the center lead? The probability is that the center should lead. But does it really lead in one sense? No, it's been pre-set up. This blast here has to be powered up, and whatever you do in here in terms of values and stuff, it has to be aware that this guy is in some way the leader. And those kinds of things are already preset. So when I say lead, I just mean lead in the next level of development. So when you're getting past the big impression, this kind of an area will be the next thing you're going to be wanting to work up. This is an area, by the way, typically of interest because of the busyness of it. But Gamel's idea that the shadow line is the battleground between the forces of darkness and the forces of light, which you may have heard me say. The fact that there are so many darks and spots and things like that in here, it sets up so many battles. It's a very busy area in that sense. So it is something to be aware of, that to see the general impression, to actually have the territory covered in a way that is generally true, is going to require this area to be busier than any other area. Now, this one is working on being busy, but it's also got a little bit more of maybe of a hang-togetherness. But it's because it's not the center, you can also put it back a little bit in terms of when you get to the point of developing it. Now, again, when you do finally go into areas like this and start developing them, you just blur your eyes and work from the visual order. So if this is the strongest major thing that happens when you're just looking at this, then set up that. Set it up, maybe this is the next one, or whatever it is, just go around this thing and start working from this to that. In that, try to maintain the order in those areas. It won't be unusual for you to find that some of these things you're doing have already been set up well by whatever happened in the spot like this. But in any case, you'll see that it's going to be more important to do this here into this, and this here into this, and this here. That's the major things. There's a lot of other stuff in here. But there's these 2 or 3 major phenomena in here that are going to be the next level of activity when you're trying to work it up. So I like to think in terms of the visual order also incorporates at times the busyness factor that makes an area more interesting than other areas. But and typically, or it isn't unusual for it to actually have sudden and abrupt light shifts like this thing right here, or some parts of this, or something inside here or here, that are also making it sort of bouncy to your eye. It's not unusual for that to also be the case, which also justifies it from the point of view of, the power effects that again, Max Melder talks about. So, but when you're looking at this big piece of paper, it should be plain to see that what's happening here is you're just missing this big back straggler and how it hangs with this one. Now, this is a big back straggler because, just in the values discussion, because you're making it white as this, and it presents now as a bright light. Well, it's part of the big middle tone values here that are even part of this. So there's this into this and this, all that big world. Sargent talks about that, doesn't he, about the 3 or 4 values of a picture. It doesn't mean there's not zillions of values in every picture. What it means is, though, that you should be, if you blur your eyes a little bit, turn away a little bit, and look for the unity, you'll see how this plus this all hang together into this, right? But anyway, in any case, from that point forward, it's a question of keeping your eye on the big impression and just dealing with whatever thing sticks out that is the least, the area that is least helpful, shall we say, in getting the general impression on there. As I said, sometimes it's just the busyness factor. But some places you can go in, like in this one early, you can go in and make this just a little busy, but quiet down, don't spend time drawing in here. You can maybe draw one little thing or something. It's the same thing up here. The great factor up here, by the way, there's also another factor called form. So the great egg of that thing will be on there as part of the general big statement, greater to lesser. So all these little bums are phenomena on a grand egg. Do you know what I mean? And it is a if you're working from the majors to the minors, it's a major. So, but what I was saying though is, so you can actually see how you could quiet this down just to get to the point of making this powerful and getting this soft edge over here for a minute. Just get this into that other value so that the general impression is more true. And then put some serious work into wherever it does something important, like right there, you might find that a really important place to articulate. And that again gives you, look how that lines up with this, look how it lines up with this. And now you have something that's going to really give you some really good, like it'll give you a really good box right through here. It'll give you something like a plumb sensation. It might even give you a whole line of things picking up right through an area. Those things are all valuable things to notice. Just quick notice, you're either on or off. If they're off, adjust them a little bit. You don't have to make every one of these little things into a big project. I'm just saying, if you notice this goes to this, you can wonder if it also goes to 2 other things. If you could hold your ruler up and say, oh, look at that. They all really do line up. But without even holding your ruler up, you can say, oh, it feels like they all line up, but look at mine. Mine are wandering around. Make an adjustment. Get them more aligned with each other. I'm saying that whenever you guys are working, even in visual order, that you still always have this, as it were, drawing problem, which is lining things up with each other and getting them right relationally in other ways. The visual order way of getting things right is effect-based, right? Which is where I use that expression, the visual order is of the effects. So the visual order, the way I talk about it, is about how this is first and something else is, other things, other areas are second, et cetera, or they're or they're on the set of the firsts, you could say, the first power projectors on the thing. That's what I'm talking about with this, and this. That's the front of that bas relief. That's the first level of clay in the bas relief. I wonder what else I can say on this and what I've forgotten, Chris, that I've already said to you, but I may have already covered it. So if you're seeing that the light of this thing is, it's important for this to show here and be lit, that gives you permission to knock this value down and produce the egg, because it's important for these areas of light to be rightly related to each other. So that great plane is never going to do anything without the midtones around it, creeping up to it and then isolating it and forming a foil for that bright light. So, yeah, if you said to me, what spots would I be working on? This light, there's this light right here, this one. And when I saw it in nature, and then you had this one and this one as alternates. They're weaker, but they're isolated, so they have this they kind of play a role in the set. Remember, I was talking in the past about the arabesque, the figure created by the leading lines of a composition. But you can use that word arabesque and just notice what the shape is of the leading blobs. So that makes, you can see it's this to this to this plus this. You can see the whole thing is a tilted cross, an upside down inverted tilted cross. There's a very definite relationship between these things. Now, you can call that the figure, or you can call it a kite. I don't care what you call it. I just care that you get some ownership of it with your mind and say, oh, I see that. I see how that's doing that. Oh, mine isn't doing that. And make your adjustments. But see the arabesque, get the arabesque, okay? But, so any way you want to use it, Chris has already been involved in some arabesque thing by getting this out here, floating these lines, and getting this out here so we can already see a figure. But it doesn't have to be this figure that we're talking about. If you're working in an interior, there'll be parts of the figure we're talking about will be on the bookcase over here, and other parts will be on the floor, and other parts will be on the figure or the flowers in the room that create that first abstraction. And we're just talking about the arabesque created by the strong, by the things like that. Now you could talk about the arabesque meaning the spotting. So here's a dark here, there's a dark there, and there's this grand dark right here. Well, observe it. Notice the figure it creates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's all part of the construct of the visual world, right? And that's what we're working with. So, but the key to the whole thing is you get something going like this, and then you just simply become this backstraggler guy and pursue the backstraggler when you're looking at the whole. So the thing that Chris needs to do is proceed along those lines, and you can see why I would say he's going to wind up pulling all this whole midtone together into a unity, along with this kind of thing here. That's going to be a key to his general impression, right? And it goes on from there. It'll definitely have to do with powering up points like this, at key places, spots like this, or even improving on this one here. But so there's the joints of these value units that power up and form the points of some new abstraction of the arabesque, shall we say. But there's anything else too, any class of critter that you want to talk about. So I wonder if I've said enough. Let's see what I've not talked about. Classes of critiques. So you understand that classes of critiques. So if you're talking about proportions, the linear proportions are their own class. Proportions is its own class, but there's a subclass. So there's box proportions, right? I even talk about mass proportions. How big, when you're generally looking at my hand, is my thumb while you're looking at this? Or how big is this whole mass to my face? A feeling for that is a big deal, right? I'm not talking about measuring. Some of these things are very difficult to actually find a way to measure. But you can mark them out adequately enough to be blobs and let them show yourself what you got there and study it that way. Anyway, but that's the family of proportions. That's a family of angles. That's the grand angle, the great gesture of the figure. That's the thing running through here. That great gesture of the figure. And then there's all sorts of little angles, little things like this, or longer things made by points, like the one I was talking about, going through, say, from here to the nose, through there to this, or something like that. Those are angles. That angle has to be right to vertical, right? Is that 1 o'clock? Nope, it's not. It's only 3 minutes, three marks past. All right, past vertical. Let's see, is there one more? Oh, well, so anyway, let me finish that. But a class of things is the form. So what we're trying to do when we get down to the end of the, well, first of all, that's the naming of the horses too, right? The classes. So I could have said naming the horses. So we're talking about the angle, which is the gesture. We're talking about the proportions in their various ways. We're talking about the form. We're talking about the light effects. We're talking about edges. All these things are in their own classes. So I can go back to what I was saying before. If you're looking to correct something in your drawing and you go to the area, you've got to say, what class of thing is that I need to work on? Oh, that's a values problem because the silhouette isn't strong enough. Or you could say it's a light effect problem, which produces a values problem, but et cetera. But it puts you at least in the ballpark. You see what I mean? Now, if you say it's a drawing problem, that's too big, right? But in the drawing world, there's the bump count, the shape thing, and how many bumps there are on a line and how far they are from each other. There's that whole world. And, and many, many other kinds of things besides just proportions. But they all have to, each one of them needs to be, as you're working along, it needs to be separated. But now I'm going beyond what you need to do. The class that we're working on today is just the visual order class. So it's a values general impression model that we're working from. And all this stuff derives from that. The one thing that everybody will tell you who's worked successfully this way is that you really have to continue to stay out of your mind. You have to stay with the visual impression. You have to stay with what this does to this, what this light does to that, what this, without words even, by the way, this spot does to that one in relation to something else, And drawing, by the way, keep on remembering that drawing. It's just directed at you, Chris, right this moment, because I didn't mention it before, but drawing is drawing relationally. So whatever the relationships are, that means to me that no matter what relationship you are articulating, you're drawing. So the size of the shoulder blob of light here compared to this one, the tilt of this one compared to this one, and they're sort of similar in type, or even the tilts of all three of these to each other, seeing those things is seeing relationally. And seeing is seeing relationally. Did I say drawing is seeing relationally? I meant to say seeing is seeing relationally. So, but that just is the way I think about this. There are areas that you will handle generically, rather this stuff here when you're that far off, you'll pull this into this larger unity without making it look false in a new way. And you'll always be working on keeping the visual order of the effects and articulating those things with great specificity. You would say drawing them. All right. So I think I've covered it and then some. I apologize, it's not more orderly, but I hope you can see in each of these notes here, which I haven't necessarily done in the order they're showing up, the stuff we've talked about before, and that this is beginning to be a part of your mindset. You're beginning to get, as Gamma would say, inculcated just a little bit, or it's being inculcated into you, would be a better way of saying it. All right. Yeah. One thing I said in the last line, it says precise versus general articulation. Say that to yourself too. When you're in an area, do you need to be precise or do you need to be general? Benson at one point is saying, he's talking about an area where things are lost, and he says, you've got to really work on that. Well, like what? Looking into it and making it not lost? No, you got to work on really making it lost. So when you're doing the area of the shoulder into this thing here, you're finding the unity of that, really work on getting it to pull together. Don't be working on all 1,000 little things in there. It's not the area to do that yet, because if you blow your eyes, you can see the time hasn't come yet, okay? But again, when you do get to have to do this spot here, articulate this like you've never drawn anything as well before in your life, okay? And he's already onto that path. He's trying to articulate stuff out here that he's seeing is first. It made me think a little bit about a comment by Degas. It may not tie in as well as I would have liked. So let's just go with that for now. The backstraggler, when an area is formy, is the lack of form. You'll have to, so at some point you'll see that this whole thing is too, he's already got some middle tones going here, so he's already noticed that that's not, I see that you already noticed that's not generally impressing you, right? So you got middle tones going up and through here. Keep that kind of thing up, but the busyness factor, so that's going to be a factor. The great value separations, the greater masses of value separations, all these things are things that are contributing to the production of what we call the big impression. Okay, the big impression, every critique, every backstraggler you ever find is going to be based on you first observing the thing as a whole. and looking at yours the same way, and noticing that something's going to jump into your eyes, being significantly off. If you go too far into a painting, you will notice there are like 8 things already off. And so I'm recommending you always, no matter what 3 or 4 marks you've made, you already are trying to see them as a whole and see if they actually, even in those 4 or 5 bumps that you've first drawn, like I try to get you guys to float points around. So come around and float some of this, float some of this, float some of this down here, and then look at them and see if you've got them right to each other yet. That's the unity I'm talking about. So if you keep doing that from the beginning, you'll never get to a place like this one where you have a lot of different kinds of things off. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you again, Stephen J. and Linda Jen. Those are always appreciated and needed. And again, as I said last week, keep your conversation, to the degree you want a more constructive one like this, keep your conversation directed at me on the subject of practical points. If you're working in our area, this will continue to be a more and more useful place for you all to visit. All right. I'm not sure if Mr. Producer had anything else for me. I did hear that we are talking about doing a thing in London in April. So that would be the workshop in London. That's the newest read on it. So stay tuned to all that. A second conversation came up, and we're thinking about actually, maybe some of you could respond to this idea, but of thinking about creating a 1-hour visit with me in person. So we could spend 1 hour together, whoever chooses elects to, but we would charge something, maybe a minimum and then an ideal number so that it wouldn't lock anybody out. But so you guys could come in and have more in-depth conversation and follow up on like things like this. We could have a point like this. And that's the way we're thinking. Like if I had something like this, if I had 20 of you guys standing in the room there, it'd be great. You guys could immediately say, what the heck do you mean by that? I've been hearing you saying that for these several years, and I still don't know what the heck you mean. That would be the chance of a lifetime for both of us. So we're thinking about doing that too. So give us some feedback about whether that would be useful to you, whether you'd be, as it were, willing to pay, because we are probably going to have to start charging for some of those kinds of things. And other than that, we are going to be doing a fundraiser. That's going to be coming up pretty soon, I think, in Indiegogo or something like that. And hope you can all participate on some level with this building we're trying to build to be able to enable some of you all to come over for workshops here in the States. So, all right. And by the way, our building is about, 3/4 the way up, so 2/3 of the way up or something like that. I don't have a picture here to share with you. I wish I did. All right. In any case, thank you all for your subscribing, sharing, liking, commenting, and keep it coming. And I hope you have a great painting week. See you next time.